Today I'm going to give you all the details on what's behind this door right here. Any guesses? Yes, you guessed it, a Blu-ray DVD player. So I featured this mod in a recent video I did with 38 different upgrades and mods on my Pinnacle here, and it solves the problem of where do you put a DVD Blu-ray player in your bedroom when you've got a layout like this where it's got the TV in the middle and then flanked by two cabinet doors on either side. These cabinets are great, it really frames up the TV, but the problem is they're too shallow for you to simply put a DVD Blu-ray player in them. They're not deep enough to accommodate that. So where do you then put the DVD Blu-ray player? Well, I explored several options, and the first idea I had was to simply flush mount the DVD player to the left of the cabinets here against the wall flush, and then have the cords running into the cabinet there. But I wasn't thrilled about that because then you've got this ugly black box and ugly cords, and it just kind of ruins the nice aesthetic here that's going on in the bedroom. So I scratched that idea. The next idea I had was to try to, again, flush mount the DVD player back behind the TV. You can see the TV is off the wall a good 4 inches at the bottom and probably closer to 6 at the top, so there's this little gap back here, and I thought, well, maybe I can flush mount the DVD player against the wall behind the TV and it's, you know, hidden out of the way for sure. But the challenge would be accessing it because this TV mount is not one that swings up or hinges up. It doesn't swing out or anything like that. It's pretty much a permanent TV mount. So then every time I'd want to put a disc in or do anything with the DVD player, I'd have to try to reach my fingers back here, and I don't think I'd be able to really get my hand back here unless you've got really tiny fingers and hands. So I also scratched that idea as well. So again, that left me with the question of where do I put a DVD Blu-ray player in a bedroom layout like this? You know, I really like these cabinets that flank the TV on either side. It's a really nice detail, but they're too shallow. So if I were to put a Blu-ray DVD player in here, it certainly would fit width-wise, but then the cabinet door would not be able to close. It would probably stick out about 1.5 inches or so, 2 inches beyond the depth of the cabinet there. So that was not an option. So then I began to brainstorm a little bit more and thought, well, what if I flush mounted the DVD player back against this wall? But the problem is it was too tall to fit in between this shelf right here. And furthermore, even if I did flush mount it against that back wall, you still got the tray on the front of the Blu-ray DVD player that's got to come in and out, and it's got nowhere to go if it's flush mounted because the tray would simply run into the side depending on the orientation. And so that's where I got the idea to solve those two problems by removing that center shelf and then putting a cutout, a very discreet cutout off to the side here where the tray could then open and close. Now what I like about this idea is it doesn't take away from the nice visual aesthetic here in the bedroom. I mean, you barely can tell off to the side here that there's a little cutout for the DVD Blu-ray player. You know, everything is tucked away and concealed inside the existing cabinet, and you don't lose the entire cabinet. There's still space here where you can put DVDs or some other smaller items, but everything is just nicely and neatly tucked away, and yet you still get full access to the front of the DVD player, including all the buttons, even the USB port, and of course the open close. All right, well, let me give you all the details on this mod, how to go from this with a shelf in the middle to this side with no shelf, a Blu-ray player, and a nice little cutout off to the side here. Now, I did this mod about 9 months ago. I did not video myself. I just wasn't thinking about that at the time. But the good news is because it's a mirror image, you know, left to right, I can then use this right side kind of as a before and walk you through step by step how to go from this before to this after with the mod. Now, I will include in the description below affiliate links to all the different products that I use to complete this mod, so I appreciate you using those to support the channel. So again, we've got a mirror image, and so what you see on the right side is exactly what was on the left side. Now, I'm really particular when I do mods like this. You know, I want everything to come out looking factory and OEM. I'd never want to modify or tweak something in such a way that it just doesn't, you know, carry that OEM look and kind of messes with the overall aesthetic. And so we want to be really meticulous and careful with a lot of these details. And so the first thing we're going to do is remove this cabinet door. You know, it's not completely in the way, but that way you don't have to worry about, you know, scratching it, scuffing it accidentally. And so to do that, we're just going to take out these two little screws on the top and bottom that are supporting that hinge, and then you can just take the door and set it off to the side. Then the next problem is getting rid of this shelf here in the middle. And again, we want to be very careful because we don't want to be left with, pry marks and scratches all over everything when we're done. And so to do that, we're going to take a look at the anatomy of how they built this shelf at the factory originally. So to start with, you've got this face frame running across the front of the shelf, just like you've got a face frame running down the sides and the bottom of the cabinet there. And so typically the face frame is attached with pocket screws. So this is a separate piece of wood compared to this side member of the face frame, and you can see the seam right there, of course. And so the pocket screws are on the back side of the face frame here, and basically they take a special jig and drill two special holes kind of at an angle in the back side of the face frame, and then that allows them to put two screws kind of at an angle that secure this center face frame for the shelf to the side members right here. And so that's how we're going to detach this face frame. The problem is, if you look under here, you can see the face frame here, but then there's a second piece of wood back here, and that is actually supporting the shelf up here. So the shelf is basically just a thin, 1/4 inch piece of plywood, and then because it's so thin, it has to have something underneath supporting it. And so you can see on all four sides, it's got a small little piece of wood here kind of supporting the perimeter of that shelf all the way around. So the first thing to do in order to get access to this face frame and remove it, we actually need to remove the shelf itself. So the shelf then is fastened with staples all the way around the perimeter. It looks like about 3 or 4 staples on each side that go into those supports, those kind of cleats that are all around the perimeter underneath here. And so again, we want to be careful. We're not going to do any prying here on the top side because we don't want to damage the sides, this inside of the cabinet here, because that's going to stay. However, these cleats, these supports underneath here, those are going to all come out. And so we're going to take a flat blade screwdriver, just a regular flat blade screwdriver. We're going to wedge it in between those supports and the shelf underneath here. And we're going to gently kind of wedge it in there and then pry up and loosen up those staples that are holding on that shelf. So again, each side of the shelf has about 3 or 4 staples securing it to the supports underneath. So once you get all those loosened up from underneath, you'll get to a point where you can just kind of tap up on here, kind of punch up, and that whole shelf is going to come out of there. And then you're going to be left with nothing but the 4 supports running around all the different sides there. So that's the next problem, to get those 4 supports detached there. The back one's pretty easy. You can see there's just a screw holding that against the wall, so that's just a screwdriver. But then the other 3 are going to have staples on them, and so when they assembled everything, they took a staple gun, and you can see right here, and stapled through the outside of the cabinet into those supports. They did the same thing over here, and then they actually stapled this from the back side to this face frame. And so again, we're going to be very careful, but take a flat blade screwdriver. You can also use kind of a 5-in-1 painter's tool, kind of a flat scraping tool, and you want to very carefully get between that support and the sidewall here and gently pry it away to loosen up those staples. Take your time, because again, these insides are going to be staying. We're not getting rid of those, and so we don't want to scuff them up and put a bunch of pry marks in them. If you do, however, don't worry, because we can hide most of that later on with some filling sticks and some markers, but just take your time. So once you get those all removed, you're going to be left with this last one here on the face frame that's right on the back, and you can kind of see the double thickness here underneath, and so that's that other support. And again, they just stapled it in and went into this face frame. So same thing, you're just going to come from the top here with your flat blade and just very carefully pry off that support from that face frame piece here. And so once you get those supports removed, all you'll be left with is this face frame running across the middle here. And remember, those are secured with pocket screws, 2 on each side here along the back. In fact, if you place your fingers back here, you can just barely feel the slot for the top one here. And so it's got one up here and then one down here, and you'll be able to get access to those screws once you remove the shelf and the support across the front. And then it's just a matter of taking a Phillips screwdriver, just like this one here, and you're going to very carefully place it at an angle, find that screw in there, and unscrew it by hand. So you're going to do that 4 times, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then that is all that's holding this face frame in there. So that's going to come right out. And so when you finish that, really that's the hardest part, you know, removing everything, because you got to be so careful not to damage anything in the process. But you're going to be left with a fully open cabinet just like you're seeing here. There'll be a screw hole visible on this back wall, and then 2 more screw holes from where that face frame screwed into the sides here. But we'll fill those in later using a little wax filler stick. But you can see the next step then is going to be measuring to make the cutout here on the side for that Blu-ray player. And the way that it's mounted in here is you can see it's got this little mount that's holding it vertically, and it's very firmly holding the Blu-ray player, so it's not going anywhere, you know, with all the bouncing down the road. This is going to hold it in place. And this is called a hide it mount. I like these a lot. I've used them in my house and various places too, but it just allows you to put things kind of flush against a wall. They have different sizes depending on the size of your device. So again, I'll put a link in the description below to this specific size along with the Blu-ray player that I used in here. But basically it's just a U-shaped channel, almost like a cradle, that's holding that Blu-ray player in there, and then it has these little thumb screws on the bottom, and it kind of separates and comes apart so that you can customize it to the depth needed here to kind of cradle and hold that Blu-ray player. Now you'll notice in my case I did not mount this hide it mount directly to the back wall. You'll notice there's a little bit of a gap here that I can slide my hands behind. And that's because you'll notice with the anatomy of the way they made this cabinet, there's kind of like a cleat here, a support, that is holding this outside of the cabinet and securing it to the wall. And they do all this, by the way, to keep everything light in RVs instead of using like a solid piece of wood for the side here. Everything's just, you know, thin plywood, 1/4 inch thick, and then they use these cleats all over. And so we've got to basically stand out the Blu-ray player from the wall. We don't want it flush on the wall because you've got this cleat in the way that's going to impair with the tray coming out and some of the buttons on the front. And again, you can see over here, if you look at the side, kind of the profile, how there's this gap here. It's not directly flush against the wall where the opening is. And so to do that, to stand it out off the wall, you can just use a 2x4 scrap. You know, it just needs to be about maybe 1.5 inches off the wall, and so just a 2x4 works great. Cut it down to about 4 inches or so that you don't see that 2x4 coming out. It's just behind the Blu-ray player itself. And so you're going to cut that 2x4 to size, and then figure out, you know, how high you want it. I chose to put my Blu-ray player kind of up all the way so that I had all this space down here, but if you wanted to make it lower, you certainly could do that. So you just got to decide where you want to mount it first and get those measurements. As far as securing the 2x4 to the wall, which then is secured to the hide it mount, I like to use glue on top of screws, because with all the vibrations in RVs and stuff, things can loosen up and rattle, especially with how thin these walls are as far as the wood for screws to grab onto. So I put a bunch of glue on the back of that 2x4 and then affixed it to the wall, and then took 2 or 3 screws to go all the way through the 2x4s into the inside Luan wall panel here. And so that made me a real nice foundation then that I could come back and screw the hide it mount here to that 2x4, and that gives me that standout here, kind of that spacing on the mount itself. Now before you do any measuring or cutting on the outside here for this opening, you want to make sure that that mount is secured on the inside, because this mount is ultimately going to dictate the size and where you put that opening there. So again, make sure this mount is secured first, then you're going to go ahead and dry fit and actually put the Blu-ray player in, just like you're seeing right here. You don't have to plug it in, of course, but go ahead and put it in here, get it exactly where you want it. And then there's 2 ways that you can measure for that cutout, that opening on this side. You can certainly take a tape measure and just get the measurements for how deep the DVD player is off the wall and where it lands here and the height and all that good stuff. The other way, you know, is if you just push this Blu-ray player in the mount and slide it all the way up against the outer wall here, then you can very carefully take a small drill bit and kind of just puncture through each corner and mark yourself the 4 corners of your cutout. And so I kind of prefer that method because then it's exact and precise. And I usually put painter's tape on the side here, mostly just so that whatever tool I'm using or a marker or whatever doesn't actually, you know, leave something permanent on the outside there. Plus it's a little bit easier sometimes on darker wood to have painter's tape with any kind of markings on it to cut off of. Now, as far as cutting the opening, once you get everything marked, you're going to have some painter's tape running all around the perimeter of the opening, and then a nice thick black line on top of that painter's tape to show you real clearly where to cut that opening. But as far as what tool to use to cut the opening, you're going to use an oscillating multi-tool. And I've talked about these in some of my other videos, but this tool is probably the most used tool that I use to cut wood in RV projects, especially when it's cutting wood that's already mounted, in tight places, hard places to reach, where a typical saw or even a jigsaw would be hard to kind of maneuver. And so what I like about these oscillating multi-tools is, first of all, they're very easy to control. They're very safe. You don't have to worry about like kickback or a blade, wanting to come back and get you. And so I really like those a lot, but they're super easy to control, and you can do nice straight lines, especially when you've got something to trace. Now, I've got a bigger blade right now on mine. I was doing some other projects and needed something bigger, but I would probably put a blade about half this size on here. It doesn't have to be but more than a inch and a quarter or so wide, and that'll allow you to really control your cut as you go all the way down. And you're just gonna hold it perpendicular to the opening and just real slowly trim all the way up, and then get your top all the way down and get your bottom. And I really like these tools a lot. They're super handy to have around, so highly recommend getting one. Now, once you cut that opening, you're pretty much on the home stretch. There's just some finishing details and trim left. You can see that I put this little black rubber trim around that exposed edge just to make it look a little bit more polished and finished off. So it's just a black piece of rubber trim that almost like a cap, and it just goes around that unfinished piece. And you can see there, you just cut it with the scissors, but I just mitered the corners even to make it look real polished here, going all the way around. And I did put just a little bit of glue on that trim, on that cap, before I put it on the wood. You can dry fit everything first, but then I did put just a little bit of glue because I don't like trim like this, coming off over time, or, seeing parts that want to come off of the wood there. So that glue just kind of helps secure it and make it look a little more permanent. But it really just kind of finishes out that opening and makes it look real factory, real OEM looking. And then as far as other details, on the inside, it's kind of nice to have a little grommet here where your cords, where your cables go through this wall here, the inside of the cabinet. And so I got this at my local hardware store. It's just a standard rubber grommet. It's probably a 3/4 inch or a 5/8 grommet. So you can pick that up at your hardware store and then just take a drill bit, of course, drill that hole out, and then put the grommet in there so your cables can go through. But it just kind of finishes out, makes it look finished from the inside. And then all that's left really is to fill the holes, remember, from that face frame that was mounted to the shelf on both sides. And so to do that, you can get a kit like this one here, where it has all kinds of different colors of stain markers and then some wax filler basically. And so then you just kind of take the color here. I think I used the black. You can see that's what's missing the most of. And because this wood is so dark, typically a dark black or ebony or something along those lines is going to blend very nicely. So, I mean, up close you can see, where those holes were, but you can see when you get about 18, 24 inches away, you can't even tell that there were holes in the side of the face frame there. So basically you just take that crayon, just like wax, and kind of work it in there. And then as you take your finger and kind of rub over there, it's going to heat up that wax and allow it to kind of melt off the excess there on either side. So you'll do the same thing over here, and then the other hole that was behind in this back wall pretty much gets covered up with the mount, so you don't have to worry about that. And then if you did happen to, scratch or rough up some of the edges along here, not a problem. You can just take a stain marker. I use this black one here, and you can just kind of gradually, gently touch up along any edges where you're seeing some exposed wood, and just have a paper towel handy to kind of wipe off any excess or kind of blend it in. And that's pretty much all the details on this particular project on the Blu-ray DVD mod. Something that you can probably knock out in about an hour or two. Just take your time on it. But I'm really pleased with how it turned out. I like how it's discreet, and really it looks like it could have been here all along from the factory, from Jayco. So really pleased with how this turned out. Like I said before in the video, I will include affiliate links in the description below to all the different products that I used in this particular mod. So I appreciate you using those to help support the channel. Now, if I left any details out or you've got any questions, be sure to drop me a comment below. As always, thanks for watching.